In the past, if you were an empire builder with ambitions of broadening your territory and influence, your go-to strategy would be to marshal your troops and invade your target. However, such an approach was fraught with issues. The locals of the invaded nation would resist, and you'd lose troops that would be more useful in larger wars if needed. Moreover, global superpowers, such as Russia, could oppose your actions to safeguard their allies. And in an age of nuclear weaponry, this is not a risk you'd want to take. Also, this method of expansion creates hostility amongst the populace, and as we know, public disdain. Regardless of how much power you wield, will ultimately lead to your downfall. Today, leaders and superpowers require different strategies in the contemporary world. The aim remains the same: gaining control over another country to expand their empire, increase wealth, and gain access to natural resources. But, they need to do this without the negatives associated with an outright invasion. They need a method where the conquered people are not even aware they've been conquered. Enter debt. In many ways, this resembles a colonial war. But today, people and resources are controlled not by governors or occupying armies, but by more sophisticated means, the primary tool being debt. It's a subtle, effective form of imperialism that can be as potent as a bullet but appears as benign as a rose. For instance, suppose you own a large construction or engineering company that specializes in substantial power plants, hydroelectric plants, or civil engineering infrastructure. Or perhaps you're a powerful politician with stakes in big private companies. Your objective is the same: more money and more power. But, there are only so many new infrastructure projects first world countries need, as they are already developed. So how do you expand your business and profits? The answer lies in least developed countries, LDCs, or third world countries. LDCs are ideal for your empire building agenda, because they lack the fundamental infrastructure, electricity, running water, roads, buildings, hospitals, schools, which you can provide. Convincing them that this development would significantly improve their people's lives and economy is relatively easy, setting the stage for a multi-billion-dollar strategy. But there's a significant hurdle: these are least developed nations, which means they lack the funds for these pricey projects. That's where foreign aid, in the form of debt, comes into play. Many view foreign aid as an act of generosity, a helping hand for third world countries. But most actions, especially those by powerful entities, are driven by self-interest rather than pure altruism. As a large construction or engineering company, you benefit from foreign aid as it enables countries that previously couldn't afford your services to suddenly do so. As a high-ranking politician, you also benefit from LDCs taking on massive debt. Because the more a country struggles to repay the loan, the more control you have over it. You can ask for favors, sway them to vote in your favor in organizations like the UN, establish clandestine military bases on their land, gain access to their resources, and more. Banks, too, benefit from the significant interest on these huge loans. Thus, there's a massive incentive not only to get these countries into debt but to drown them in it. Because the larger the debt, the more interest, money, resources, and power you stand to gain. This approach yields nearly the same benefits as invading and taking over these countries by force. Your businesses have more customers. Your banks have more loans to give out and collect interest on. And your government has more control and power. But with this new form of imperialism, third world debt, you achieve the same results without being seen as the enemy. This has been happening since the 1970s and appears to be quite successful. Developing countries had a staggering debt of $7.8 trillion in 2018 alone and were still in the developing stage. Interest payments alone on this debt yield pure profits to the banks. All of the $7.8 trillion moved directly from the banks to the developing countries, and straight back into the developed world companies. The money never actually left the developed world. But the responsibility to repay the loans, and more, now rests with the third world populations. However, there's one more challenge. How do you convince a country, or any bank for that matter, to agree to such a manipulative proposition? The solution lies in salesmanship. The goal is to make the third world countries feel that it's their own decision to take on these massive loans. This isn't as difficult as it may seem. Third world countries have plenty of problems. Poverty, lack of education, inadequate clean water and electricity, corrupt leadership, to name a few. To convince them, you exploit these pain points. Instead of sending salesmen, you dispatch economists, engineers, analysts, and other professionals with impressive titles. Their job is to study the country's economy and make projections of what it might look like in 10 or 20 years. With new infrastructure, such as a hydroelectric plant, the more optimistic the projections, the more eager the country's leaders will be to take on the debt. And the bigger the project can be justified. And of course, a bigger project comes with a bigger loan. So, the responsibility of making this entire scheme work, entrapping needy countries in debt, rests on the shoulders of these professionals making these projections. If they fail to convince the government of the necessity of these infrastructure projects, these companies lose out on billions of dollars. So, there's probably a big incentive to be a little overly optimistic with the numbers. If you get this step right, the banks will approve the loans, and these developing countries will willingly accept the Trojan horse of debt. This has led to developing countries being ensnared in a growing debt of $7.8 trillion as of 2018 and still counting. In conclusion, this new form of imperialism may leave you questioning your morality. But remember, just like a soldier grows numb to the brutality of war with time, you too must become a professional soldier in this new game of imperialism. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the profits from exploiting third world debt.